and thank you for joining this session of the RENEW18 Open Research Seminar. I'm Marco Storni. I'm a postdoc in the RENEW18 group in Brussels. And it is with great pleasure that I introduce today Tamás Demeter for a discussion dealing with Humean chemistry. So just a few words on Tamás' biography and publications. Tamás is professor of philosophy at the Corvinus University of Budapest and senior research fellow at the Research Center for the Humanities, also in Budapest. He's published widely on David Hume, the connections of Scottish moral and natural philosophy in several journals, just to name a few: Philosophical Studies, the Monist, Synthèse, British Journal for the History of Philosophy, and many more. He's also contributed to important collections that we've all used in our research, like Newton and Empiricism, and also in the forthcoming Oxford Handbook of Newton and the Oxford History of Scottish Philosophy in the 18th century. Most importantly, is the author of a monograph, David Hume and the Culture of Scottish Newtonianism, and co-editor or co-editor of books and special issues such as The Sociological Heritage of the Scottish Enlightenment and Conflicting Values of Inquiry. And also, which is perhaps of interest to some of the members of our group, a special issue of Synthèse on the uses and abuses of mathematics in early modern philosophy. So today is presenting work in progress on Humean chemistry. Tamás, I will leave you the floor for 15-20 minutes, or for a short presentation of your draft, and then we will have a discussion altogether. So thank you very much again for joining us, and please.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all of you to be present here. Now, the draft that has been circulated is a very draft, so it's not far from a polished paper, as you could see, especially from the footnotes, but the text itself has to be revised because it doesn't have a clear trajectory, as opposed to this presentation, I hope. So what I'm trying to present today is the skeleton of a book for a Cambridge Elements series on 18th century connections. And there's going to be a piece in that called Humean Chemistry. And what I'm presenting now is basically the steps that I would like to take in that book, maybe not counting the final step in the book, but that's not going to be that interesting today. Anyway, so can we switch slides or video? And the main claims that I would like to formulate in the book and defend and argue for is that David Hume and William Cullen's epistemological and metaphysical commitments resemble. I mean, Cullen, as you all know, is an important figure in the early history of modern chemistry. He is one of the founding fathers of this movement for philosophical chemistry that is to be distinguished from practical chemistry or alchemy, the kind of chemistry that aspires to the status of a natural philosophical discipline, that aspires for theoretical understanding, explanation, and prediction, as opposed to practical benefits in agriculture or industry. So some kind of theoretical aspiration to make chemistry a discipline comparable, systematic discipline comparable to physics, for example. Hume requires even less introduction here. He's, of course, a moral philosopher, not a natural one. But as I'll try to argue, there is important congruences between them, and some, like John Christie, for example, has argued that Cullen's epistemological and metaphysical views have been influenced by, or had been influenced by Hume. I wouldn't like to go that far here because it's very hard to prove any kind of direct connection between them. There's some traces in Cullen's lectures, some references to Hume, but I don't think they are clear and strong enough to substantiate any claim about direct influences here. what I'm trying to do in this forthcoming book is to show congruences. So I don't claim anything stronger than that. That their epistemological and metaphysical views resemble. Whether their sources are similar, whether Cullen was influenced by Hume, that's a separate question. It's even it is even more important to keep this in mind with respect to my second and third points. With respect to Hume's methodology, which is, as I'm going to argue, similar to Cullen's methodology. So Hume's methodology in analyzing mental phenomena is also congruent with Cullen's methodology of chemical analysis. Now, it is, of course, improbable, even impossible, for Cullen to have influenced Hume, because Cullen started to lecture in Glasgow in the late 1740s. By the time Hume's treatise had been published, it was published in 1739, the first two books, and 1740, the third book. Nevertheless, their methodology is similar, which isn't a shocking, not necessarily a shocking claim, because they might have had the same sources or very similar sources. Hume had always been interested in natural philosophy, and then contemporary natural philosophy, and we don't know much about his readings. But it's not entirely impossible. I'm going to spare you the historical details and some mild evidence to this point. But he was certainly interested and mildly well read in then contemporary natural philosophy. So it is not impossible that in the rising culture of chemistry in Edinburgh, which was basically in the first few decades of the 18th century, Hume could have picked up pieces of knowledge. And also in Edinburgh, in Paris and La Flèche, where he composed the treatise, he had access to all the relevant contemporary literature and even was part of a world or a culture where the flow of knowledge, flow of contemporary knowledge, contemporary natural knowledge, was completely natural and organic part of everyday life. Okay, so their methodologies are also similar. And then finally, the third point is that Hume's conceptualization of mental phenomena has in crucial respects affinities with Cullen's conceptualization of chemical phenomena. Now, with respect to this final and the previous point, I mean B and C, it is also worth noting that Cullen is not known as an innovator, as a revolutionary. He's much better known by his contemporaries and by the history of chemistry as a synthesizer who organized then existing pieces of knowledge into some kind of coherent and teachable whole. So what it's even so. The point I'm trying to make is that the pieces of knowledge available for Cullen were available for Hume, so it's not entirely impossible that they have been influenced by very similar sources. Okay, can we switch to the next slide, please? Okay, metaphysics and epistemology. Now, these are the main tenets that I would like to draw attention to. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because there's very little novelty here, and this has been explored by John Christie and Arthur Donovan and others that, well, they drew attention to Cullen's and Hume's similar views with respect to God, in God's role in a natural inquiry or in inquiry in general. They don't really think that it is useful to appeal to God in moral or natural inquiry. Cullen clearly says that, well, if you appeal to God at any point, that means the end of inquiry. So that's not a very useful thing to do. Well, they are both committed to inductivism. There are very nice passages in both, well, Hume, that's needless to say, but in Cullen, that you are supposed to collect evidence first and then draw conclusions. Also, you have to be modest with respect to your knowledge claims, and they are both committed to the importance of the kind of conceptual clarification that's not necessarily characteristic to science as we know it today. That's the kind of conceptual clarification that's more characteristic to philosophers than to scientists. Maybe Well, the primacy of the phenomenal, by that I mean the abandonment of the mechanistic way, or the way mechanical philosophy induces us to look at phenomena in terms of corpuscles, qualitatively homogeneous parts of matter interacting with each other, and geometry being the field of giving us the rules of description and prediction. So that's they are both inclined to leave this framework of mechanical philosophy behind in favor of properties, qualities, and regularities accessible at the phenomenal level. This is a feature that Stephen Gokroger emphasizes in both Hume and Cullen. Now, one thing that I would like to claim as my discovery is Cullen's adherence to the regularity theory of causation. I find a nice passage in him where he basically, as if he were echoing those passages and Hume that support Hume's in the interpretation of Hume as a regularity theorist. That's, of course, just one possible interpretation of Hume on causation, but in this respect, Hume and Cullen seem to converge. I think that passage is somewhere there in the draft that you've seen. Okay, thank you. Can we switch to the next slide? Now let's take a look at the second point, or the second main claim, namely Hume's methodology in analyzing mental phenomena and Cullen's methodology in analyzing chemical phenomena. Now, Cullen draws a distinction between two ways of conceiving or looking at bodies. They can be looked at as aggregates of atoms, and atoms in this sense mean homogeneous particles, not atoms in the present-day sense of the term. So either you look at them as aggregates of qualitatively homogeneous parts, as mechanical philosophers do, or you look at them as compounds or mixed of substances or principles. Now, it's worth drawing attention to this kind of conceptual confusion in Cullen, the confusion being that mixed and compounds, they are, probably I'm quoting that as well, whatever, they are not distinguished for him. So they are used the terms are used interchangeably. That's a feature that you find, if you take a look at the treatise, you find the same kind of feature in Hume. He talks about complex impressions and complex ideas in terms of being mixed and compounds. I have the impression that with respect to ideas, he's inclined to talk about them as compounds, and with respect to impressions, complex impressions, he is inclined to talk about them as mixed. And as you will see, it might have a kind of some sense given certain other features of Hume's theory that I'm going to discuss. The same is true about not substances and principles, but elements and principles. Those terms are also used interchangeably in Cullen, which I'm going to return to in a second. Okay. Now, these two ways of looking at matter and bodies in general is congruent with talking about their properties in terms of general properties, and properties like geometric properties that are characteristic to all bodies independently of their qualitative composition, or in terms of their particular properties that are characteristic to this or that kind of matter. Now, again, the first way of looking at bodies in terms of general properties, that's characteristic to mechanical philosophy. Looking at matter and bodies in terms of particular properties, that's characteristic to the chemical outlook. If you take one step further, well, once we conceive bodies in these two different ways, we can analyze them in two different ways again, by division, I mean dividing matter into smaller and smaller particles, or by separation and combination of qualitatively different parts. This means for Cullen a division into integrant versus constituent parts. Integrant parts are proper parts, tiny little particles, homogeneous, qualitatively homogeneous. Constituent parts are like, well, to use a completely anachronistic example, is like hydrogen and oxygen in water. So if you analyze water into hydrogen and oxygen, then you resolve it, then you analyze it into constituent parts. Okay, of course, using this division into integrant parts is mathematizable. It uses a homogeneous conception of matter, so a mathematical treatment is almost natural here, as opposed to analysis into constituent parts, where you pay attention to the a posteriori empirical connections between various empirical or experimental observations. Now, all this, I think, is reflected in Hume. He also analyzes impressions, complex impressions, into aggregates and into particular property, as aggregates or as compounds. When we have the ink spot experiment, when he tries to give us an illustration of what a simple impression or simple perception is, and he invokes this ink spot experience, suggesting that let's put a spot of ink on a white paper and then ask someone or remove ourselves from this sheet of paper to the distance where it almost disappears. Then the last moment where you can still see it, then that's the experimental setting where you manage to produce a simple impression. All our perceptions are composed of these pixels. Let's call them pixels, but it can be a pixel of feeling as well. He's got an example of saying that, well, the way one way of knowing that your passions are composed in that way is when you are asked if you desire 1,000 pounds or 999 pounds more, then you will respond that, of course, 1,000 pounds. That's what you desire. But even if to the feeling, the two desires are almost indistinguishable, there is this pixel of passion or feeling that distinguishes the two impressions. So either we've got extensive or intensive complexities in terms of these simple perceptions. But there's a different kind of analysis that Hume suggests already at the beginning of the treatise. It's the famous wide globe example in 11718, and it also, the lesson comes up in 1235 as well. So where he suggests that well, if you have an experience of a wide globe, then first if this is the only experience you have, then shape and color in this experience are indistinguishable. The way you come to distinguish shape and color is via resemblances, while comparing this experience with experiences of black globes and white cubes, and then you will see that with respect to shape, this experience resembles to the black globe, and with respect to color, it's the white cube that is going to resemble to that. Now, analysis into these components, or in Cullen's terms, constituent parts as opposed to integrant parts, is important to Hume. Actually, an analysis of complex ideas in terms of these constituent parts like shape, color, and so on and so forth, as opposed to pixels, is more important, because this analysis into constituent parts is there everywhere. That's what he does in the famous argument famous Humean argument for causation, where he analyzes the idea of causation in terms of contiguity, succession, constant conjunction, necessity. So these are all basically aspects, as he calls it in 11718, aspects of a complex idea of, say, two billiard balls colliding. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that this analysis is an analysis of complex ideas into constituent parts, and that their analysis into simple integrant parts, that's not that important for Hume. These pixels are general properties of perceptions. That's what I was trying to say. It's extension and in terms of extension or intensity, and those components or constituent parts are particular properties not present in. Those are suitable to distinguish ideas qualitatively. This gives us the Humean methods of analysis, either by division into simple perceptions or by resemblances or distinctions of reason. That's what he suggests at the end of the first book, 11718, into parts or aspects. This is a Humean term, and it's surprising that he's not using that term more frequently, because when he talks about ideas, he is actually most of the time talking about aspects of ideas, not ideas. But that's okay. That's if we read those uses of the term idea against the background of 11718. And it is also more important to him to find a posteriori connections between perceptions than logical ones. Actually, logic to Hume, or for Hume, reduces to psychology. That's he clearly says in the abstract and elsewhere as well. So logic is basically an a posteriori discipline for him, surprisingly. Okay, can we switch to the next slide? Now, let's turn to chemical conceptualization. Here, the first thing to draw attention to is the state of chemical knowledge in the first half of the 18th century. Well, drawing on Heshok Chang, especially Chang, but to some extent to Ursula Klein and Ellen Chalmers as well, what I would like to draw attention to is this very unsettled state of chemical knowledge before Lavoisier, basically. What Chang says is that it is easy to forget these days that in the 18th century there were two different ways of looking at chemical phenomena, either in terms of principles, either in terms of principles or substances or elements. The difference being that if you look at the principlist and compositionist way of knowing, as Chang distinguishes these two positions, principlists think that the chemical world is such that, various principles meet, they unite, and they change each other into something else. Compositionists, they believe that immutable elements come together and combine something new, but these immutable elements can be separated again. And Klein says basically that this, not referring to Chang, but in concert with him, she says that, well, the idea of elective affinities, elective attractions, is very important in this, in establishing this compositionist way of looking at chemical substances, because that's discovering them or trying to classify them and discovering more of them. That establishes this combination, separation, recombination with respect to chemical elements. So it's not that chemical changes are not forever, that they are reversible. Now this idea comes along with elective attractions. The idea first published in 1718 by Etienne Geoffroy. So okay, now against this background, I suggest that we could look at Cullen's hesitation or equivocation between using elements and principles in very similar senses or interchangeably, using mixed and compounds interchangeably. What is important, what's going to be important, I'm focusing only on those parts of Cullen here that are going to be relevant with respect to Hume. His distinction between gravitating and supple matter. He was an ether theorist trying to explain heat, fire, states of matter, and sometimes compositional properties of matter with reference to differing degrees of density of ether in them. He was also active in producing elective attractions, systematizing new ones, so producing tables of elective affinities. That was a common practice of chemists in the 18th century. And also, he was very much interested, of course, in studying various chemical reactions like mixture, fire, and concretion. Now, having this kind of conceptual apparatus in Cullen, and again, we are talking about the 1740s and 50s, so these are after Hume's treatise, but the Cullen's sources are clear, Hume's sources are less clear, not just in this respect, but in other respects as well. But against this background, we can perhaps turn to the last slide on Hume's conceptualization. And I'm just going to, yeah, sorry. Okay, see you stiffen around sometimes. Bye. Okay, so what I'm just going to draw attention to a few aspects of Hume's conceptualization here. And it's a common knowledge among Hume scholars and non-Hume scholars. It's from David Owen to Jerry Fodor that the Humean mind is a mechanical mind, meaning that it's a passive associative machine which is which receives a kind of some stimulus from the outside world, and that stimulus puts it into motion, and then everything that happens there is just basically crunching this this material that the mind receives from the outside. Now, I'm trying to sketch an entirely different picture of the Humean mind here. The most important passage that I would like to draw attention to is 2261 in Hume. That's where almost every if you go to a university and take up a class on Hume, then the first thing you learn is that the mind is composed of perceptions, and there are two kinds of perceptions here: impressions and ideas, and they are only distinguished in terms of vivacity, force, liveliness, and vivacity. That is only phenomenologically, and it's everyone treats Hume, as far as I know, everyone treats Hume as if this distinction was kept in place throughout the treatise and no further improvement is being made to it. Now, in 2261, however, Hume introduces a very important distinction, saying that ideas are solid and impressions are fluid or liquid. So, and there he says that ideas can combine like building blocks, like Lego bricks, into complex ideas, while impressions, they are just like paints or colors of paints, and then you just mix them so as to lose their identity. So they lose their original identity. So what we have here is basically this distinction between elements and principles. Impressions behave like chemical principles. When they meet, they lose their identity and combine into something new. When you combine elements, ideas like building blocks, and in the compositionist way of looking against the background of a compositionist way of looking at matter, then you will find that, well, these elements are regainable and recombinable. So this means a non-phenomenological distinction between ideas and impressions. This is a distinction in terms of compositional properties, in terms of how ideas and impressions can combine into complexes. There's a further distinction that's not in this passage but elsewhere, which suggests that ideas are passive, so it's the mind that operates on them, but impressions, especially passions, they are active. They have an intrinsic tendency to change over time, not just into actions, not just in terms of motivating actions, but one passion to change into or transform into another passion over time. And this, I think, resonates rather well with this compounds and mixed conceptualization of, well, ideas and impressions. Ideas are impressions, compounds consisting of atoms composing molecules in a way, while impressions, they are mixed in the sense of, well, when you mix two different kinds of liquids, and the former, he has, especially in book 2, he has several examples of that. I mean, mixing colors, and then how a liquid, you can take two transparent liquids and pour them together, and eventually you get a non-transparent liquid. That's an example he uses to clarify some interaction of passions there. Okay, now there are several further implications of this. One is basically that another very widespread view of Hume is untenable, namely the view that he's the arch associationist, that there is nothing to the Humean mind than associative processes. I mean, if you just consider that ideas are copies of impressions, then there must be something in the Humean mind that transforms liquid impressions into solid ideas. It's not that impressions spontaneously turn themselves into solid ideas. Why? Some impressions do, but we don't have. Not all impressions are turned into ideas, because that would mean that we can imagine everything we received in the form of impression, or we can remember everything we received in the form of impression, which is clearly not true. Anyway, the point is that both copying, when the mind copies, the imagination or memory, these are the two faculties that copy impressions for Hume, when they when the mind copies impressions, then that's a process of concretion. When something liquid is turned into something solid, and the principle necessary for that transformation must come from the mind, which means that the mind cannot be a pure associative machine. It must have faculties, it must have properties of its own, it must have an activity of its own. So this leads to the otherwise, I think, very obvious project in Hume, already in the introduction of the treatise, that he wants to explore the faculties and their principles. It's not just associative processes. The question is the contribution of the mind. So let me just draw attention very quickly to sympathy here, which is the reverse process of copying, when the mind, in the case of some selected ideas, namely my ideas about your mental processes, those are turned back into the corresponding impressions. Now, in this respect, the mind does kind of selective work, because it's only ideas about your mental states that I can transform back to the corresponding impression. I cannot do that. They cannot do the same with the idea of a chair or a giraffe. I cannot turn it back to a corresponding impression. And then also what happens there is a kind of melting. Then the mind contributes a principle which melts the solid idea back into its corresponding impression. So that's another active contribution from the mind's part. Okay, well, I'm running out of time. One thing I certainly want to point out, or two things. This is the idea, the problem of vivacity. Vivacity is the main phenomenological distinguishing feature between ideas and impressions. Now, this comes in degrees, and and belief is a form of, well, when you believe an idea, that's, according to Hume, it's a more vivacious idea than the idea of a fiction, for example. However, he struggles with what belief is or could be, or it cannot be a separate impression, which makes sense because you just don't have a separate impression of belief without believing something. If you believe something, it's always a belief in that something, not just the belief in itself. Now, he speaks about belief and the transmission of vivacity, that is inference, basically, in terms of fluidity and heat spreading through certain channels, as if heat was a kind of, as if vivacity was, well, but when he speaks about the material, the ideas taking spark from this, and anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the spread of the inferences and the way he talks about belief is very much congruent with an ether theory of heat. Belief is not an impression, not a standard kind of perception. So it's not like gravitating matter in Cullen's chemical world, but it's more like ether that's that makes certain ideas hot, vivacious, forceful in that sense, and also more liquid in a way, making it more suitable, or well, making it more suitable for various associative connections. So belief and inference for Hume, I think, can be understood on an analogy with the ether theory of heat. And the final point I would like to make is about association. In 1.4, there is a 144, I think. There is a passage in Hume where it's cited very widely about association being somehow akin to Newton's gravity. But in that passage, Hume, actually, I should have wrote at least that passage, whatever. In that passage, Hume talks only about attraction, not about gravity. And if one takes a closer look at how association works and how it is sensitive to qualitative differences between ideas, if you just consider that some ideas can be associated by resemblance, some others by cause and effect, but there are no, I mean, these are not, there's no sort of universal and uniform force acting in the mental world analogous to Newtonian gravity. It's more like a set of or various kinds of elective attractions with various strengths holding between various perceptions. So I would suggest to understand Humean association as analogous with elective attraction and not with Newtonian gravity. And then in the final point, I'm just hinting at a few passages in Book 2 where Hume clearly talks kind of chemical language in relation to the passions. So this is the skeleton of the book to be written, and well, I'm very happy to receive and answer questions if I can. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamás, for this introduction. So I open the floor for discussion if there are questions or comments on this talk or on the paper we've read. So please, Arnaud, first.
Yes, thank you very much, Tamás, for this very inspiring talk, very rich talk. I may have missed a point. I would like you to precise this. So what are the grounds for the more historical grounds for a connection between Hume and Cullen? Because so the parallels are pretty obvious, but then perhaps can you substantiate a little bit more because I guess your claim in the end is that the chemical model really is at stake here in Hume, and so that's why I'm interested in knowing more about the connection.
Okay. Okay, they were friends. They knew each other. Cullen was an enthusiastic supporter of Hume's candidacy for the Glasgow chair in moral philosophy. But what the point I'm trying to make is not so much of connection or influence here, but just of congruence. And then what I'm trying to say when I'm going to write the introductory chapter is that they are part of the same culture. They are influenced by. They are educated in the same institutions, University of Edinburgh. They both have, well, to some extent, similar interests in experimental philosophy, which is the model for Hume's moral philosophy. So so one way of putting it would be to say that, well, you will see interesting things in Hume if you look at him against the background of then contemporary chemical knowledge, and Cullen is an exemplary representative of this kind of knowledge. Okay, so that's probably, that captures my point, I think, fairly precisely. I wouldn't like to say that there are direct lines of influences here, or no, not much. With some references in Cullen to Hume, but certainly no influence from Cullen. Some references in Cullen to Hume, but no line of influence from Cullen to Hume. That's practically impossible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have another question from Ovidio, please.
Yeah, thank you. So A very kind of general question. It might be totally misdirected against Hume, but I was wondering, kind of in general, so you can read this connection of Hume with chemistry in a very strong naturalistic way, right? So like the way you analyze impression just is the same as you analyze like chemical elements, right? But you can also read it in a more analogical way, right? You can say, no, these are just, there's just a single way. You kind of get inspiration from the study of chemistry, and then you just apply the same set of rules, but on a different content, which is the content of the mind. And I was wondering if there's a possibility to make this continuity way thicker, as it were, and to claim, no, Hume, so as it regards impressions, not ideas, he actually could have argued for a continuity, a direct continuity between chemistry and psychology, right? I mean, how naturalistic do you take his commitment to chemistry to be, in other words?
Okay. Well, I would say that Hume is characterized by a chemical outlook. So that's even if it doesn't, he certainly says that he wants to perform or wants to sketch the anatomy of human nature or the human mind. And he also says that, well, let's model our inquiry here that has been so efficient in anatomy, and let's compare to the human mind to the animal mind. And then so this is a certainly a naturalistic project, but I wouldn't say that it's, I can't even see how this could be taken as a literal continuation of the chemistry. It's more like just when you, in these days, when we talk about computational models and taking the computer as a kind of model of the mind, or let's just try to think about the mind as if it was performing computations of certain kinds of representations. It's just as Fodor suggested. Now that Hume, I think, but I wouldn't say, I'm not sure he's doing it consciously. He just, but I don't know. The anatomy is a recurrent metaphor. And if you're in the business of anatomy, then it's also almost natural to say that you are also in the business of physiology, especially if you cannot study structure directly. And you can study the structure of the mind only through, observable behavior. And then you have to infer back to motivations and structures, underlying structures that are directly not observable. So, then you are also in the business of physiology. You have to take a look at functioning here. And if you are in the business of physiology, then it's almost natural to turn to chemistry, because a large part of physiology is chemistry. Actually, there is a passage in Cullen's medical writings where he says that the human body can be studied at least from three angles. It can be studied as a hydraulic frame, a mechanical hydraulic frame. It can be studied as an animated nervous frame, and it can be studied as a chemical mixed. So this is this is almost if you think, which I think Hume does, if you think that the mind is an organic entity, it's closer to organic living bodies than to machines, then it's almost natural to think about the fundamental level of explanation will be chemical and not mechanical. So yeah, so that's I would say that this is the outlook. This chemical outlook is characteristic to Hume, but I don't think he would say that there is a literal kind of continuation of. Martin Lenz has a very weird theory of Humean sympathy, saying that that Hume thinks that we literally infect each other with our emotions and passions and whatever. And then there is, now that's a bit too much by my standards. I don't think that's Hume's project.
So the follow-up,
yeah, just a very short follow-up. No, so the reason why I was asking is, I might be wrong on this, but I read Fodor as when he was claiming that Hume's mind is basically a mechanical machine, I kind of took Fodor to make like a pretty literal point. So I kind of took further to say, no, Hume's mind is almost literally a machine. Of course, the matter theory grounding it is not the same necessarily as matter, because you need to establish that experimentally, right? But it literally kind of works in the same way, in the very same way, right? So this was why I maybe it would be useful to maybe contrast this type of claim you are making, the more underlying type of picture, with Fodor and the other people who you were quoting. I don't remember exactly who. But yeah, sorry, that was
Owen, but it's very, I mean, it's very widespread. Yes, late Fodor, early Fodor, he punches Hume all the time. He doesn't like Hume very much, because for the early Fodor, Hume is the representative of associationism and empiricism, two things that he hates. The older Fodor sees in Hume a representative of the representational theory of mind, and in a way a forerunner of his own project. But what he doesn't see, that I think Hume is a forerunner of John Stuart Mill and Mill's mental psychological chemistry, because this idea of mental chemistry is, I think, the most clearly explained in John Stuart Mill as a criticism of his own father's mechanical theory of association. Now, this is and Fodor also dislikes mental chemistry. He very much dislikes. Actually, I think I have a few passages on this at the end of the paper. But he never sees Hume as doing a kind of mental chemistry. Yes, you are right. He thinks that these are, well, Fodor, as almost everyone else, thinks about ideas and impressions as atoms of building blocks, so these mechanical building blocks that are, where the only interaction between these building blocks is addition. You can add them and then perhaps separate them. But then that just doesn't work, because Hume thinks differently. He thinks about simple ideas and simple impressions differently than Locke does, for example. In Locke, for example, shape is a simple idea, but then in Hume it's not. A simple idea for Hume is the idea of a blue pixel, indivisible, extensionless, right? It must be extensionless, because if it's extended, then it is divisible. So it's indivisible, extensionless pixel. So that's a simple idea. And your visual field is composed of that. Your passions are composed of that. And then then weirdly enough, there's a switch when you read someone on Hume, then everyone acknowledges that this is a simple perception. Good. But then suddenly everyone starts to talk about shapes, for example, shapes as if they were simple ideas in Hume. So there is a change without. The shape is an aspect for Hume, not an idea. It's an aspect of an idea that you can notice only if there are the ideas in the background, and you can detect relevant resonances. Now, anyway, I'm all over the place a bit, but the point is that for all the mechanists, they just think that these ideas, they just combine them. You put them together as mechanical building blocks, and that's how you get your mentality. But not in Hume. They combine in various different. It's more chemical than mechanical. I mean, chemical in the sense of a non-mechanical chemistry. So I don't know if I'm responding here or just talking about something that's distantly relevant to your question.
I guess Ovidio for the time being is satisfied with your answer, and then we can turn to Annie's question or comment, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your paper and for your little conference on the paper. I have a question that is quite general, and it's because the analogy between chemistry and philosophy is made also with respect to other philosophers such as Kant. Kant explicitly mentions that some of philosophy should follow the example of chemistry in its analysis. But is there not some kind of chronological problem, because the term or the procedure of analysis was much older than chemistry? And so when in the 17th century chemistry took up the concept of analysis, it seems that they recognize that something is similar in chemistry as to what is done in philosophy, or what was done in philosophy and for example, mathematics. And then, let's say, we as historians of philosophy or historians of science, we go back and we read these passages and we seem to say, well, the philosophy that those guys were doing was like analogous to the chemistry. And I think we often forget that philosophical analysis, mathematical analysis was older than chemical analysis. So do you see a problem there, or is it no problem at all?
Okay, thank you. Now there is, yes, Kant is an important. There's a book by Jascha Schmidt. I don't know if you know about that. Whatever, it's on Kant, and she brings out this chemical aspect of the Kantian mind. And actually, I think that there's an entire project possible here on the chemical mind in history of philosophy. Because this kind of approach, this chemical, but the history of the mechanical mind is very well explored by Margaret Bowden with those 2 huge volumes, and several others, several volumes on various aspects of the history of the mechanical mind. The chemical mind, I mean, chemical conceptualizations of mental phenomena, that's not well explored at all. But we could really have a story, I don't know, anything much earlier than Hume, and that actually makes sense because that's in the 18th century when chemistry starts to emerge as an independent discipline. But from or after Hume to Jerry Katz, for example, Fodor's one-time co-author, you can draw a line of chemical various chemical conceptualizations: Nietzsche, Frege, William James, several others. Okay, maybe even in Hegel. As for the question of analysis, analysis is a very heterogeneous concept, and what you've got in mathematics. So if you take Newton, then he turns back to old ancient mathematical examples of analysis, to Pappus and I don't know who else. Now that kind of analysis is the root of his analytical ideal in the Principia, but that ideal is already abandoned in the Optics, and that's an entirely different kind of analysis that he applies with respect to color, for example. Or if you compare Newton's analysis to Descartes' analysis, or that's again, I mean, analyzing problems in terms of simple natures. Now that's very not even, you don't even analyze phenomena, but you analyze problems as if they were quasi-mathematical problems. Now that's again an entirely different kind of analysis. And when you come to chemical analysis in Cullen and others, when you are interested in quality, not in mathematical or conceptual ingredients, but qualitatively different ingredients. Now that's another concept of analysis. So I don't think we use the term analysis, but it's just so it's a label for so divergent methods that it's in itself, it's not very informative. I think you always should specify whose analysis this analysis is, and what are the actual steps that you are supposed to take while performing this analysis.
I also observed that you use quite often the term affinity in
Yes.
the analogous sense. I think that's really a term that stems from chemistry, no?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
In 18th century chemistry, elective attractions, affinities, rapports, I mean, they are well that's basically the same phenomenon that's designated by those terms. Yes,
And you use it often, for example, if you say there's an affinity between color and
yes.
hue.
It's useful in various contexts. Exactly. Yes.
Then we can turn to Karin's question, please.
Yes. Okay. Thanks for the talk and the written version you sent us. So I thought that the part on Hume where you discuss how Hume uses chemistry as a model to clarify the human mind or analyze the human mind, I thought that was very interesting. However, I had difficulties seeing the unity of the various elements of your paper. That's maybe one thing I'd like to address, but another worry I had while reading the paper is that many of the attempts to show affinities between Hume and Cullen, in my view, they are not that relevant. Yes, as you also stressed in your introduction, they are part of the same culture. They draw on similar sources. They're both modern. They're both anti-speculative. They're both anti-metaphysical, and so that's how they have certain elective affinities. But I do not quite see why the points about Cullen are relevant here. Yes, of course, there is the biographical aspect, and the fact that they had in a common scientific or academic context. But in my view, the points about the Cullen-Hume relationship distract from what I took to be the more interesting point, namely Hume's employment of the model of chemistry in philosophy, and yeah. So what is the added value of discussing in some detail that that the position of Hume and Cullen converge? Yes, especially because Cullen, as far as I understood from your paper, did not advance the discipline of chemistry in a kind of specific way. Yes, at some point you mentioned that he synthesized the achievement of chemistry at the time. So you may have, drawn his model from other contemporary sources, and so I think my point comes down to the question: why is Cullen at all relevant to your purposes, apart from the fact that Cullen wrote this letter and wanted Hume as a colleague and so on, which are biographical but do not seem to go beyond the biographical interest? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the reason why I think Cullen is relevant as the background of my account of Hume, meaning that, well, precisely because he was not a revolutionary in chemistry, but was a representative of the then present state of chemical knowledge, he brings together those pieces of knowledge that were also available to Hume and were there for the conceptualization of mental phenomena. And I think with respect to method, I mean, there's a very clear formulation in Cullen, I think, to say that you can look at matter as an aggregate of homogeneous atoms, or you can look at matter or bodies as compounds of substances. And I think this way of looking at perceptions is clearly there in Hume. Now, well, how can you analyze your perceptions? Then you can, or bodies in the natural world. Then you can analyze them in these two ways, and that's what Hume also does, and that's what Hume also represents, a kind of chemical analysis which is congruent with what Cullen has in mind for chemistry as the proper method and program of chemistry. Cullen is relevant in this respect, not as an influence on Hume, but as a representative of the knowledge that was available to Hume and was deployed and systematized in a different way in Cullen and in Hume. Is that an answer?
Well, I'm not. I'm. To be honest, I'm not really convinced. Just because I think that in order to either you say, well, Cullen is just one representative, and I just pick him, yes, for whatever reason. But I think that if you want to make a somewhat stronger claim, then you'd have to exclude that Hume was inspired not by Cullen, but by any of the other treatises on chemistry at the time, which is going to be very hard. Yes. So there is.
But I'm not interested. I'm not really interested in influences here. I don't really want to explore that. I want to explore a new, especially Hume's conceptualization of mental phenomena, treatment of mental phenomena. And what I'm trying to say that this is congruent with then contemporary chemistry. And who would be a better representative of this chemistry than Cullen, who was a friend of Hume, a contemporary of Hume, and very famous actually in his own age as a synthesizer and teacher of chemistry. So who could be, and also they both live in Scotland. I mean, you cannot find someone closer to Hume in geographical, historical, or conceptual, in conceptual respects. So that's why I'm using, at least I couldn't. Maybe there is someone, but it's just, well, the congruences to me are very, very near, and that's almost surprisingly near. But then it's not surprising if they have the same sources, if they are coming from the same culture, if they have the same theoretical affinities, one in the natural domain, the other in the moral domain.
Well, so I still find it, methodologically speaking, not very precise. Yes, I think that because you're claiming you're claiming all the time. Well, it's not about influence, yes, but then either you want to say something stronger than just a kind of arbitrary congruence.
Why is it arbitrary?
Well, because I think sorry, but I think you'd have to demonstrate that what Hume needs for his own purposes, yes, his chemical model to analyze human mind, you need to demonstrate that what Hume needs is not, very generic and could have been picked up from anywhere. Yes, so it seems to me that
not picked up from Cullen. I'm even saying that it could not be picked up from Cullen, because Hume was writing 10 years before Cullen started to lecture in Glasgow.
Yeah, well, so then I understand even less why the paper includes Cullen at all. So I think there is a kind of, at least I do not see how a kind of reflection on the congruence between Hume and Cullen is relevant to the part that is, I think, more interesting, namely, or philosophically more interesting, namely Hume's employment of the model of chemistry. But I think my worry is clear. Yeah. So.
Okay, if I'm saying that that Hume was inspired by then contemporary chemistry, then probably I should say something about then contemporary chemistry, and then I probably should say something about that through a representative of then contemporary chemistry. And who could be better for that purpose than Cullen? Probably I could.
Well, I think it slides into at least a suggestion that there is more than just a kind of a congruence. But I'll maybe I stop here. Yeah. So.
But thank you. I'm going to think about that. Thank you.
I mean, I had a question which is unrelated. So if Jeffrey or Ovidio, you have a follow-up, you can go first. Otherwise, my question is.
I do have a follow-up.
Please.
I do have a follow-up. Sorry, I missed the beginning. I'm in the airport here, but I just want to say a little bit about the idea I guess I'm pushed back a little bit on what Tamás is saying and Karen, that Cullen was just a synthesizer. So I just want to set that stage a little bit, that he was extremely important in chemistry. And I mean, if you want to think about him as the grandfather of the refrigerator, you can do that. If you want to think about him as the initiator of scientific chemistry in Great Britain, he is your guy. He's the mentor to Joseph Black. You cannot find a more important figure in mid-18th century chemistry in Great Britain, I argue. So I think there's relevance there. I also think we don't really know. I mean, what Tamás is trying to do, I know he's not trying to make a causal argument here that Cullen had an impact on Hume, and that's right, just chronologically, but we really don't know about a lot of these other links going on at the time. We know they were both, in touch with Lord Kames, for example. There's all sorts of links, indirect links between Hume and Cullen going on, and not sort of merely biographical. So I think there's sort of a lot of avenues you can explore here. But I think as long as Tamás is not making a causal claim that, Hume read his Cullen and that came up with these ideas, there's a lot you can explore there. So,
thank you.
So, Ovidio, was your question a follow-up, or can I?
Yeah, somehow, but I think you can go ahead, and I'll see if I'll still ask it.
Okay. So I go back to what you said, like more in the paper than in your talk, if it's okay. And there is one point in which I'm interested, because I'm interested in heat, fire, and all this kind of chemical universe. And you talk a lot about heat, fire for Cullen. And I was wondering, just perhaps a curiosity, but I get that he accepts this inductivist methodology. He stresses the primacy of the phenomenal and so on. And at the same time, when it comes to the conceptualization of heat and fire, he quickly gets to claims such as that fire is everywhere, heat is movement, then it is an oscillatory motion caused by a subtle fluid, something like phlogiston or, I don't know, Cartesian subtle matter, which seem like non-empirical or at least very abstract claims. So I was wondering whether this methodology of like inductivist and phenomenalist methodology is, I don't know, reshaped or applied in a certain specific way by Cullen or by 18th century British chemistry, or if these claims can be considered part of an inductivist methodology, according to you.
Yeah, Jeff knows much more about that than I do, but the way I see Cullen here, I don't think that's in conflict with an inductivist or experimental methodology. And what he frequently does, the way those bits that I read, I mean, what he frequently does is that, well, here is a phenomenon, and then what is the explanation? Just, let's observe it in this and that and whatever, in various respects and various contexts. What is the best explanation? What can be the best explanation of this phenomenon? And then he comes up with 1, 2, or 3, whatever options. And then he starts to exclude, well, this is not working because of this and that. That can be seen as a kind of eliminative induction. And then finally, he ends up with a hypothesis, and that he says that, well, maybe this, but it doesn't present it as a kind of knowledge claim. That's a kind of that's a much more. There is a kind of humility there. That's, well, this is the hypothesis I favor, and this is the best. This is. So you are better off if you are thinking along these lines than any other. But there was an ether controversy, right, Jeff, in Edinburgh,
yes,
precisely around Cullen's maybe overextended.
I can say a little bit about that. So there are two important things here, and I think, Marco, you're onto something when you are wondering about questions about fire and heat. So I don't know if it's maybe not well known, but Benjamin Franklin specifically wrote to Cullen to get his theory of fire. So Cullen had a presentation to one of the philosophical societies about his theory of fire, and Benjamin Franklin was so interested that he wrote him and wanted him to send it to him. And there's a sense in which you can talk about the entire second half of the 18th century in Scotland and chemistry about and interpret it in terms of heat, animal heat and fire. If you look at the work of Joseph Black, if you look at Cullen himself, and a lot of that comes initially from Cullen's approach to fire. And one of his few things that he publishes you can connect that to cold and heat and so forth. And that also is connected to the notion of the ether. So what Cullen adopts the notion of Newtonian ether to explain his chemistry and also to explain his theory of the nervous system. So he believes that there's an ether running through the nervous system. And he gets in a lot of trouble with this. One of his students publishes a dissertation talking about the ether this, ether that. And in the first edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, he gets taken to task for it. His name is not used, but they make fun of him for all these claims about ether. And he has a very fiery response in one of his lectures and saying that Newton believed this and this and that. It's all very interesting. But I think that's a really important set of topics there. When you're talking about fire, you're talking about the Newtonian ether. This is all critical to chemistry and to medicine at the time, especially in Edinburgh.
Thank you so much, both of you. Does anybody? Yes, Stefan, please.
Hello there. I hope my questions are not redundant, but I will ask them anyway. So thanks, Tamás, for this very interesting comparison between two fascinating minds. I enjoyed reading the paper. And first, I want to start with a suggestion with regards to the part wherein you state that Cullen makes this distinction between the general and the particular properties of bodies. And this is connected to the issue of sources, potential sources on which either Cullen or Hume based their views upon. And so, to the best of my knowledge, and this will not surprise you, Herman Boerhaave was one of the first to make this distinction between general and particular properties, with the specific aim of defining chemistry and medicine with regards to natural philosophy and physics. So physics deals with the general properties, and chemistry and medicine, they both deal with the particular properties of bodies. And we know that he did so in the early 1710s in a series of lecture notes. And these lecture notes were later made public in a pirated but nevertheless reliable edition that appeared in the 1720s. The title of that work is called Methodus Discendi Medicina, and there you have Boerhaave's discussion of this distinction. So I think this could be useful to your discussion there. It's clear that Boerhaave was relevant to Cullen. We know this through the work of Christie and others. So I think this is a relevant place for you to look at. And so, since my discussion of Boerhaave leads me to both chemistry and medicine, in your paper, of course, you have focused on the relation between chemistry and Hume's Science of Men. Are you also going to explore similar methodological and epistemological congruences between Hume's Science of Man and Cullen's medicine, or are you just going to stay focused on the chemistry part? That's the question.
Okay. Thank you. In this particular project, I'm going to focus on the chemistry, but I think Cullen's medicine and Robert White's physiology as well, and they are very relevant for broader, more comprehensive interpretation of Hume, which focuses on his idea of an anatomy of the human mind. Because there you could, I can very well imagine, I think I hinted at this, I can very well imagine a three-layered interpretation of Hume, arguing that there is a level of chemistry, a chemistry of perceptions, there is a physiology of mental processes, and the end product is an anatomy of the mind, which gives you the structure. That's the sort of the crown on it, because it's the rest is just observing processes and interactions, and then you get the structure at the very end. That's the anatomy of the human mind, and that's I think in a way congruent with the way how Cullen sees medicine in general, what this chemical, physiological, and anatomical layers or approaches to the human body. So, and there Cullen will be relevant, as will be Robert White, if I want to stay within the Scottish context. I mean, they are all, yeah, and which I prefer. I mean, there's just a nice, neat, geographically and historically neat area. Yeah. So yes, in the long run, but not in this particular project.
Okay, thanks.
So Ovidio had another question. Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, no worries.
Already raised your hand.
Yeah, so this might just be my ignorance, I don't know. So I very much like this distinction between the content innatism and the architecture innatism, right? You have it at the end when you discuss Fodor's, right? Yes. So first I was wondering if this is like your distinction, or is this like some common knowledge? Because then I was thinking, this is like, this can be a strong argument against Fodor's reading of Hume, right? And if this paper will stay a paper, you could also frame it by starting from this. So look, Fodor might be wrong if we have this distinction between content on the one hand and architecture innatism, right? And here's how this distinction can be spelled out. Well, by this analogy with chemistry, because chemistry has two types of constitutives, right? One is the elemental constitutive, and the other one is the integral constitutive. And if you can make this distinction between these two types of analyses, as it were, then this distinction holds. And then, if this distinction can be made, then Fodor has some trouble making the mechanical point about Hume's mind.
Thank you. That's very useful. No, I don't know if anyone else makes this distinction between content and architecture, but yeah. So I'm not in this form. Actually, there is a footnote somewhere in Fodor saying that he cannot do. I mean, Hume cannot do without faculty psychology altogether, even if he, in Fodor's reading, even if Hume wishes to, and because there is imagination, and imagination is a productive faculty, but that's a kind of hint at there being some kind of cognitive architecture in the background. But Fodor even goes as far as saying that in Hume we don't have any kind of mental architecture whatsoever, because everything is statistical regularities between perceptions following one perception following another. So that's what the mind is, a bunch of statistical regularities, which is again it's not going to work, because there is resemblance, and resemblance is not statistical. You can argue that causation and contiguity are, but resemblance is certainly not. And well, yeah. So no, that's my distinction. So yeah. So and that's a good start for a paper. Thank you. That's to reverse it. Yeah. Thank you.
So Karin had another question.
Yes, I guess my question is related to Ovidio's. At least it deals with Hume and the notion of analysis. So at some point in your draft, you claim that conceptual clarification can be seen as the central enterprise of Hume's inquiry. And well, I wasn't sure I agreed with that, or at least it seems to me that well, it's clear that Hume is doing conceptual analysis. Yes, so he does analyze, as you also point out, crucial concepts. But it seems to me that that the project in the inquiry cannot be reduced to conceptual analysis, but that conceptual analysis is a means to do something else, namely to demonstrate that human mind is incapable of acquiring a priori causal knowledge. Yes, or drawing causal inferences independently of experience and habit and so on. And it seems to me that in order to reach this aim, Hume needs to do something else than conceptual analysis. Yes, so and as was already pointed out, it requires an inquiry into cognitive acts that the human mind carries out. It requires a kind of, inquiry into, as said, into the imagination, into habit, into the act of making judgments and so on. And so it seems to me that this cannot easily be subsumed under conceptual analysis or conceptual clarification, even though it can also not be easily subsumed under something like synthesis. Yeah, so it seems to me that what Hume is doing, like Locke, but also like Kant later on, is part of a kind of methodology that that's, I think, has something in common with faculty psychology, but it's different from it in the sense that it has a particular aim. Yes, in this case, a very critical aim. Establishing the limits within which human cognition is possible, etc. Yeah, so so I was wondering what your view is on this point. Yes, on whether conceptual clarification is the main thing or just a means to do something else. Yes, and I think that Hume has this in common with many other modern philosophers.
Yeah, okay. Well, on the one hand, yes, I agree. I mean, the inquiry is richer than just conceptual analysis. On the other hand, well, I'm not. So when you begin with your origins, with the in section 2, the origin of ideas, association of ideas, then basically you've got an empiricist framework in place. And then what is knowledge? Then that's the question, and then it turns out what you can have it in 2 versions. You can have it a priori, not much problem with that. Empirical knowledge, now that's different. And given that all your ideas are coming from this, all your concepts, if you wish, they are coming from experience, then this is the only way you can get knowledge. So this, okay, so what the point I'm trying to make, that conceptual, in this empiricist approach to concepts, or empiricist way of conceptual analysis, is basically the central project there. That's how you come to the conclusion that you just, well, given this, you cannot have knowledge about the external world. Given this, you can have this concept of liberty, and this concept of necessity, and this concept of causation, and this concept of testimony, and that's what you got in the remaining chapters. But so this, with these empiricist commitments in the background, he clarifies those central concepts of cognition, basically. As you wouldn't agree with that? Probability.
Well, I think that in my view, it's somewhat reductive. Yes, because I think that what philosophers do is not just conceptual analysis. Yes, they have a particular aims. In this case, as I said earlier on, to determine the limits within which cognition is possible. And I think that reaching these aims, or this particular aim, requires conceptual analysis. But I think it's not the core of what modern philosophers took themselves to be doing. Yes, Hume also took the inquiry to develop something like a metaphysics. He tries to identify certain principles of cognition. Yes, of course, these principles are the principles of association, but he does compare what he's doing to something like metaphysics, and I think we need to take that seriously. Yes, that modern philosophers do something more than just conceptual analysis.
I'm fine with that, especially. Okay, so maybe we can agree if we say that, well, this kind of conceptual analysis is certainly not 20th century kind of conceptual analysis, right? I mean, this is a clarification of concepts with more substantial. Metaphysics is a very loaded term, especially in Hume and around Hume. So I don't think that's very useful here. But I think he's certainly not doing Gettier style conceptual analysis or whatever. Not this kind of looking for sufficient and necessary conditions of whatever, or Grice or whatever. Not this classic analytic. But then still the project. I mean, this, as opposed to the treatise, I would say, there is much. The inquiry is much less systematic. It's just more. I mean, there's some crucial concepts here. Like I said, I mean, from induction to testimony, from providence, from inference, empirical inferences. That's at the very bottom of our cognitive practices. Let's just clarify these concepts with these empiricist commitments in the background. I mean, when I'm saying with these empiricist commitment in the background, then I'm already indicating that that's a diversion from this Gettier style of analysis. Because there are no empiricist, no commitments whatsoever. You just take the concepts and you're trying to explore conceptual connections, and that's certainly not what Hume is doing. So, but okay, well, maybe if we say that it's this Humean kind of conceptual analysis with empiricist commitments is a central part of the project in the inquiry, and then just
so as I said, I think it's a conceptual analysis. I think should always be a means, and I think it is a means in the philosophers we're discussing, and it seems to me we have to take them seriously as philosophers, yes, and not just as those who clarify a couple of concepts.
Sure. I mean, well, if you take the skeptical doubts concerning the understanding, there's a section 4 and 5, right? Yes. So in section 4, I think what he does is he tells us that the Aristotelian and the Cartesian models, they are not working because reason is not working that way, and they don't give you knowledge the way you want to get knowledge, right? Again, the Cartesian construal of knowledge and the Aristotelian construal of knowledge, that doesn't work. Here is an empiricist construal of knowledge. This is what's going to work. So you should, isn't that a possible reading?
So I think that he wants to come up with an alternative, yes, but it has to be able to compete with the classical examples you mentioned. And as said, this cannot be simply a matter of clarifying some concepts or putting some empiricist commitments up front.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
okay.
I think there is a coherent philosophical project that Hume is pursuing, and that I think, as said, cannot be really be grasped in terms of conceptual analysis and empiricist commitments.
Okay, thank you.
But I think there are a couple of raised hands. I don't know whether Ovidio or Jeffrey want to follow up on this, or they have already.
Mine was not a follow-up. Mine was a diversion. So if Ovidio wants to follow up, then
okay.
We can't.
Yeah, I mean, I like the discussion, but I think, just saying the aim should be more than conceptual analysis might not be the best way to cash out what's happening, because, it depends what you mean by a concept, right? So if you don't take a concept to be simply a mental artifact or some artifact of language or whatever analytic philosophy or like empiricism take it to be, then, I mean, you can have a philosophy about ideas, which is not necessarily representational. I mean, you also get to talk about things, not only concepts in this rigid way, right? So, I mean, in this sense, I don't understand Karin's pushback against this project, as it were. But this is, again, maybe a bit too
if I can very, very quickly clarify, Ovidio, I was not referring to a distinction between concepts and ideas on the one hand and things on the other hand. So that was not my point. Yes, but I think at least that 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 asking, what is human cognition? Under which conditions is human cognition possible? What is it? What epistemological status it can have, and so on. I think that these questions are different from analyzing concepts.
That is very Kantian, I guess.
I know, of course, yes, but that's it doesn't mean that it's misguided.
So we might just leave it here for a second and then turn to Jeffrey's question.
Yeah, I was just wanted to get back to this fascinating conjunction between chemistry, medicine, and philosophy at the time, and I guess I have some ideas, and maybe it's not a fair question, but why isn't medicine, for someone like Hume, why isn't that the science of human nature? Right? If you look at medicine in the 18th century, it's extremely broad. You have to, philosophy is part of medicine. You're studying the human frame in health and sickness. It's just always curious to me why it's not more of a, there's such a divide, it seems, in between medicine and at least moral philosophy. In fact, Cullen takes issue with David Hume because when Hume distinguishes between moral and physical causes, Cullen says, you're not talking about physical causes. That's for us physicians. That's not for you to talk about when you're talking about mental illness, for example. So I'm just curious, like why isn't medicine seen as the exemplar of a science of human nature at this time? Do you have a sense of that from Hume at all or other philosophers? It's just not something they want to.
I have two answers. Yes, I have two answers, not necessarily compatible, but maybe. The first answer is about the age and the understanding of the label moral philosophy. Moral philosophy is studies moral beings qua moral beings. So not as physical objects, not as physiological entities, and medicine is about precisely this physiological aspect that's not part of moral philosophy, because we could be moral beings without having this kind of constitution, this kind of medical whatever, physiology, whatever. We could have that. So that would be one. That would be, if I had to give an answer against the background of then contemporary concepts, then this would be the concept. If this would be my answer. If I want to give an answer against the background of Hume's project, then I would say that, well, in my reading, his project is a methodologically solipsistic project, or his project is committed to methodological solipsism, basically starting from the premise that there are perceptions. And let's see how we can account for cognitive and affective functioning with this commitment in place. I mean, with this fairly obvious commitment. This is not something you can doubt. You can even say that this is a Cartesian starting point, even better than Descartes' starting point, right? Because this is certainly not something you can doubt, as opposed to, well, even the cogito can be brought into question, but not that there are perceptions. Now that's very hard to, okay. And from where can we get from there? And he even says passages where he says that, well, it doesn't matter where these perceptions come from, if they are God-given or induced by external bodies, whatever. That's not my project. My project begins where the perceptions begin. So start from perceptions, and then there is one or a few passages where he takes a physiological detour, where in the beginning he's got a quasi-physiological account in terms of animal spirits of how we are led astray in our reasonings by, I don't know, when animal spirits, they just start to switch from one trace to another trace, and then but then he sort of excuses himself. Oh, sorry, I'm just taking a detour here, and probably this is all chimerical, but the phenomenon is real, even if my exposition is chimerical. That's where he says this. So those physiological detours are not part of the actual project, because that's committed to methodological solipsism, just like Fodor. And that's what you are interested in, is just that begins at the level of the mental phenomenon.
It's interesting, just because how Cullen, it's one of the few points I found where Cullen really objects to Hume. So I'm writing this up now, so I'll get it on paper. But Yeah, it's interesting that there's such a difference there. Yeah.
Is there any, Henny, please?
Well, I had raised my hand, but then I lowered it because it shifted to Jeffrey's question. But I still had a follow-up on the discussion of conceptual analysis. So I think when philosophers come up with certain questions, for example, what is perception or what is cognition, these questions can still be seen as a kind of conceptual analysis to be done. And I think many of the questions perhaps appear while encountering problems doing the conceptual analysis. So I see Karin's point. So it's much more than conceptual analysis, but I think in a broad sense of conceptual analysis, and I think that's the sense that modern philosophers had in mind. I don't see many philosophers just saying that they are doing much more. So they seem to take themselves to do this and to, I mean, when they ask these philosophical questions or they have a task to do in philosophy, what is a cause? What is perception? I think the question itself is a kind of well, leading to conceptual analysis in a broad sense. So I think this is like it has come back in a lot of our discussion. So I like to hear your opinion on that. Of course, later Deleuze will say, of course, philosophy is also creating concepts, but that's much later. So I think in modern philosophers, I think we can take conceptual analysis in a broad sense, and then it covers quite a lot, and perhaps even the things you mentioned, Karin. So I wonder if it's not anachronistic to have a very term-based conception of conceptual analysis, and to see this as what modern philosophers were not only doing. Yeah, that was just, but it's a larger discussion, and it's a bit going astray from your paper, of course. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I'm inclined to think, but then I'll be interested in hearing what Karin thinks. But I would be inclined to say that the treatise is much more work in psychology as we understand it these days than epistemology, for example, metaphysics. And the inquiry, I'm inclined to think that this is much more epistemology as we understand it today than a kind of psychology. So there's in the inquiry his normative inspirations are clearer, much clearer than in the treatise, which seems like an explanatory and descriptive and explanatory enterprise. Here, when, for example, he discusses liberty and necessity in the inquiry, it's very hard to read, not as a kind of conceptual analysis. This is what you mean when you say that's liberty, right? When your actions fit into a network of causes and effects, you just can't talk about liberty in that network. That means that your actions are still determined, but still you are free. But if your actions are not determined, then you are a madman. So then you probably don't want to. You probably want to fit into a network of causes and effects. So that's what you are talking about when you are talking about liberty. And then similarly, in the necessary connection chapter, well, you cannot get this concept that you think you have, this concept of cause and effect, without constant conjunction, without repetition, without habit, without expectation. So that's what you got, not something else. That's what you can mean by causation, right? So it's very hard not to see this as of course, I admit, a broader kind of conceptual analysis than the one we have in the 20th century, but still, it's an essential part of the project.
Can I briefly comment on this, Marco?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, yes. So I think that for me, it's a bit hard to identify or to see how we can identify conceptual analysis and epistemology. But there is another term that is used in the draft, namely Cullen's reference to analysis of the human mind. Yes, which I think was also something
Yes.
that Locke took himself to be doing, and that probably can be traced back to Paul Royal logic and so on. And I think that this notion of an analysis of the human mind cannot really be captured by conceptual analysis. Yes, even if it also cannot be used to some kind of psychology. So I think that these philosophers were doing something new that had something in common with psychology or with logic as it was understood at the time, and had something in common with maybe conceptual analysis. But I think they were taking themselves to be doing something new, namely providing this analysis of the human mind. Yes, and I think that we need to identify what they do, what goes beyond conceptual analysis. Because also, let's say earlier philosophers, also in the Wolffian tradition, for instance, they were doing a lot of conceptual analysis. And I think that for these modern philosophers, something else was at stake. Even though evidently in the text you can point to cases of conceptual analysis, as you just did.
Okay. Well, okay.
Yeah, so I think that the notion of analysis of human mind that you quote in relation to Cullen is an interesting one. That so that's my suggestion.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any other question or comment? Especially of those who have not yet asked any questions, but I mean, otherwise, we still have 5-10 minutes left in the session, but if there is no further comment, just please join me in thanking again Tamás for this very, very nice presentation and discussion. Thank you so much. And so we look forward to reading this new book, which is in preparation, or the paper on Hume and Cullen, if there will be one. And I just convene you to the next session of this seminar, which is supposed to take place on December the 5th, so in 10 days. And I will email you with further details, and you will also find details on the website as usual. So thank you again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon or morning. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Tamás.
Thanks.
See you. Bye-bye.
It was good to see you. Bye-bye.